I walked into the living room, stripping off my scrub top from a 16-hour shift. The light was bad, making the afternoon look sickly yellow, but the air felt heavy with the scent of my mother's expensive perfume, and something sharp and metallic like fear. She was standing by the window, twisting a tissue between her fingers, and before I could even set down my bag, she hit me with it. My mother demands I give both my kidneys to my golden child brother. The phrase didn't even sound real, not with her voice, which was tight and high, manufactured for maximum effect. I just stared at her, my hand frozen on the strap of my work bag. I was 28 years old, a licensed registered nurse working 3 jobs to pay off my student loans, and in her mind, I was still just a resource to be harvested. "Michael needs them, Sam," she said, her voice dropping into a dramatic whisper that still carried. "You have 2 healthy ones, and he has none. You could save him today if you weren't so heartless." My brother Michael was 32. His kidneys were dead, destroyed by a decade and a half of relentless, self-inflicted alcoholism. He started drinking a bottle of vodka every day at 16, a habit Mom had laughed off as boys learning to handle liquor. When doctors warned him at 25 that his organs were failing, she'd called them dramatic. When he needed his first dialysis at 30, she blamed them for not trying harder. Now he needed a transplant or he would die, and suddenly I was family again after 10 years of functional estrangement. "I offered one," I said, my own voice flat and steady. I had rehearsed this in my head the moment the first call came 2 weeks ago. 1 kidney. That's the ethical, legal limit for a living donor. It's enough to keep him off the machines and give him a long life. She shook her head violently, the fake tears finally arriving, spilling down her carefully made-up face. "1 isn't enough. His body is weak. He needs both to have a real chance. He needs a full recovery." She stepped closer, trying to use proximity as a weapon. "You're stronger than Michael. You could handle it." I took a deliberate step back, resisting the urge to wipe the invisible dirt off my uniform. "If I gave him both, I'd need dialysis forever. I'm 28. That's 50 years of machines keeping me alive 3 times a week. You want to save him by killing me? Don't be dramatic," she snapped, the mask of grief slipping completely to reveal the familiar, sharp entitlement underneath. "This is classic you, always looking for the most difficult angle. Michael is your brother. A real brother would do this." It was classic Mom. Michael, the golden child since birth, had received a brand new car at 16. I got nothing. He got college paid for but dropped out halfway through the 2nd semester. I got student loans, worked 3 jobs, and finished nursing school without a single dime or word of encouragement from them. He got bailed out of jail 3 times for public intoxication and driving incidents. I got kicked out at 18 for getting pregnant. That pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, which she'd looked me in the eye and said I deserved for being irresponsible. The memory of sitting alone in a sterile emergency room, utterly abandoned, still clawed at my throat. It was the moment I realized they weren't just neglecting me, they were actively hoping for my failure. For 10 years, she never called. Neither did Michael. I heard about every major family event, Michael's wedding, Dad's retirement, her 60th birthday, through awkward social media posts from distant cousins. I wasn't invited. I built a life without them. I worked. I studied. I moved on. Now, the machine I had become, a competent, organ-carrying body, was suddenly the key to restoring her perfect, entitled son. So, suddenly I was family again. "You haven't spoken to me in 10 years, I said, the words heavy and deliberate. "Not since you told me I deserved to lose my pregnancy. And now you expect me to sacrifice my health, my future, for the convenience of a brother who drank himself into this situation, enabled by you." Her expression hardened. "That's ancient history. This is about life and death. You're letting the past kill your brother." "No," I countered. "I'm protecting myself. I offered the one thing a healthy person can legally and ethically offer. You rejected it because you want me disabled instead of inconveniencing Michael with a slightly less healthy body. You just want your image of the perfect family back, and you need my organs to buy it." She didn't deny it. Instead, she started crying louder, the performance escalating. "You are killing him! You don't deserve those organs! I'm gonna tell everyone what kind of selfish person you are!" I watched her numb. The anger was there, cold and solid in my chest, but the exhaustion was deeper. I just wanted her out. The answer is no, I said. And the answer will always be no. I suggest you focus on finding a suitable deceased donor match for Michael, or accepting the reality of thrice-weekly dialysis, which I can assure you is perfectly manageable for decades. I see patients do it every single day. She spun on her heel, shouting that I would regret this, that I had no family now, and that she would ensure my life became a living hell until I changed my mind. The heavy scent of her perfume lingered in the air long after the front door slammed shut. Moments later, my phone buzzed with the first text message. It was a picture of Michael, looking frail in a hospital bed, captioned, "You're killing him. This is on you." I shut off the phone. I hadn't felt this lonely and targeted since I was 18, but this time I wasn't alone. Ethan, my partner, would be home soon. My only defense against the storm that was coming was to document every single attack, every lie, and every piece of harassment, starting now. I had to use the logic and pragmatism I learned in medicine to survive my own family. The first text message, showing Michael looking pained but clearly staged, felt like a declaration of war. I shut off my phone, but the quiet of the apartment was only a temporary truce. I knew she wouldn't stop. After 10 years of silence, the machine of my mother's will had finally engaged, and it was focused entirely on harvesting me. The harassment campaign began in earnest the next morning, confirming that my initial terror was justified. The messages started coming in torrents, not just from my mother, but from numbers I didn't recognize. "You have 2 perfectly good kidneys and you're letting your brother die," one read. "Selfish is a mild word for you," said another. I had no idea how many relatives she had looped into this, but the guilt was infectious and designed to wound. The texts were bad, but the escalating public actions were worse. She called the hospital during my shift, demanding to speak to my supervisor, Catalina. Catalina, a tough but fair manager who had seen everything, pulled me aside. She said, her voice low and guarded, "Your mother called, claiming you were having a mental breakdown due to severe personal stress. I told her you were exemplary. I recommend you handle this before it affects your employment." She didn't fire me. She didn't even write me up. But the chilling reality was that my mother was actively trying to destroy the only stable, controlled thing I had, my career. My job as a dialysis nurse was more than a paycheck. It was the proof that I was competent, reliable, and capable of a life independent of her chaos. She then called my landlord, claiming I was unstable and a hoarder who was dangerous to other tenants. Thankfully, my landlord was a pragmatic man who hadn't seen a problem in the 2 years I'd rented the apartment, and he dismissed her. The worst, however, was the attack on Ethan. He found a strange voicemail on his work line. It was my mother's voice, thick with performative tragedy, calling me a murderer who would let her own flesh and blood die a slow, agonizing death. "She's trying to isolate you," Ethan said that evening, his jaw tight as he played the message for me. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the sound of her voice filling our space. "She wants you to believe that everyone outside the family thinks you're a monster. She's done this since I was a kid," I whispered, the exhaustion finally hitting. If I wouldn't do what she wanted, I was the bad one. I was selfish, irresponsible, or just plain cruel. That's why I just stopped fighting her years ago. Ethan reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His touch was solid and warm, the only real thing in the swirling drama. "This isn't just about guilt anymore, Sam. This is harassment. She's crossing lines that are illegal, not just mean." The low point came when she showed up at the hospital. I was walking through the main lobby when I heard a loud, theatrical sob. "Everyone, look at the nurse who won't save his brother's life," she screamed, pointing directly at me. "He has 2 kidneys and won't share." I froze. A security guard immediately moved toward her, recognizing the scene as a textbook disruption. Security escorted her out, but she returned the next day, and the day after that. For 3 weeks, she stalked me. It was a suffocating pressure that made the very act of existing feel conditional. My saving grace was my job. I work in the dialysis unit, and I am surrounded by people who are living proof that Michael's condition is not a death sentence, but a manageable chronic illness. Mrs. Delaney, who is 72, has been on machines for 20 years and complains only about her daughter-in-law's cooking. Mr. Jones, a father of 3, is planning a fishing trip for next month. They live full lives. I saw their quiet endurance and realized the truth. Michael wasn't dying. Not really. He was uncomfortable, burdened by the inconvenience of 3 times a week dialysis, but he could live for decades like that. My mother wasn't fighting for his life, she was fighting for his convenience. She wanted her perfect, unburdened golden boy back, and she decided I should be the one attached to the machine instead. This realization, fueled by the relentless harassment, was the first real change in my emotional state. The paralyzing fear of being selfish was slowly being replaced by a cold, protective rage. They had pushed me to the edge, and the only way out was through. The time for avoidance was over. I had to use the truth, my truth, Michael's truth, the medical truth, as a weapon. I picked up my work phone, the one my mother didn't have the number for, and dialed Michael's personal cell. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. I needed to hear him say the words himself, to confirm that he was actively participating in this cruelty. I needed the full, unvarnished truth to completely break the remaining chain of obligation I felt toward him. That was the only way I could end this completely. After 2 weeks of hell, fueled by the cold clarity of my patient's quiet survival, I called Michael. I needed to hear him say it, needed the wound to confirm my pain was valid. I used my lunch break, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, the sunlight glaring off the windshield. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was lazy, annoyed, already sounding like the burden of dialysis was an enormous, unfair imposition. "What do you want, Sam?" "I want to know if you're aware that Mom is demanding both my kidneys," I asked, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion, like I was reading a chart. A short pause, then a casual exhale. "Yeah, she told me. That's the plan. And you understand what that means for me, Michael." "What, the dialysis thing?" He actually sounded bored. "You're younger. You'd adapt better. Besides, you don't have kids to worry about. You might someday, but I still might. It's a completely viable scenario for you." The casual way he dismissed my entire future as a viable scenario hit me, but I didn't let him hear the tremor in my voice. "I tried to have kids, Michael. I miscarried when I was 18. Alone. You know that?" He scoffed. "You already tried and couldn't. It's not like you're guaranteed anything. I need a functioning life now. You're just keeping organs you don't need." The words were a physical blow. He wasn't just demanding a sacrifice. He was weaponizing the deepest trauma I had against me, using the miscarriage like proof I didn't deserve working organs or a future. The final, fragile thread of familial obligation snapped. I was no longer dealing with a troubled brother. I was dealing with a cruel, entitled stranger. "Thank you, Michael," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The conversation confirmed everything. This wasn't about saving a life. It was about Michael's convenience and my mother's control. My fight needed to be surgical, based on facts, ethics, and law. I immediately scheduled a meeting with Dr. Grace Marshall, the lead transplant surgeon at the Regional Medical Center. She was known for her fierce advocacy for living donors and her no-nonsense approach to complicated family dynamics. I took the rest of the day off. Driving across town to the main campus, I sat across her wide, orderly desk, feeling the immense difference between her professional, ethical space and the emotional chaos of my mother's world. I laid out the documentation Ethan had helped me compile, screenshots of the mother's aggressive texts, reports of her trespassing at the hospital, and my clear offer of 1 kidney, followed by her explicit rejection and demand for both. Dr. Marshall, a confident woman in her early 40s, read every item carefully, her face growing colder with each page. She was the first person with true, objective authority to hear my story. She finally looked up, her expression one of professional disgust. "She wants you to donate both," Dr. Marshall stated, making it sound like an absurdity. "That's not even legal. We'd never approve that even if you begged. It violates federal guidelines for donor safety. A living donor must be able to resume a normal, healthy life with minimal risk." The immense, bone-deep relief that washed over me was almost sickening. I wasn't the bad guy. I wasn't heartless. I was refusing to do something that no ethical hospital in America would permit. My choice was correct, not cruel. "She's been telling Michael that the team would go through with it if I just agreed," I explained. "She fabricated the medical necessity." Dr. Marshall's jaw tightened. That ends now. We are putting a flag on your file immediately. No staff member, including nurses, will discuss donation with you unless the full transplant team is present. And we are going to call your mother and Michael right now and set the record straight." I agreed, and she put the call on speaker, dialing my mother's number first. Mom's voice came through sharp and angry, demanding to know why Dr. Marshall was interfering in family business. Dr. Marshall, known for her steady, professional demeanor, stayed perfectly calm. "Mrs. Marshall, I am calling to clarify the medical parameters for living donation. Federal law prohibits any living donor from giving both kidneys because it would require the donor to be on dialysis for life. This is not negotiable. The transplant team would never approve a double donation. Furthermore, Michael requires only one healthy organ." My mother's voice went up an octave, a piercing sound of panic and rage. She insisted Dr. Marshall was lying, protecting the hospital from some imaginary lawsuit or being bought off by insurance companies. She accused the doctor of sabotaging her son's only chance. "I understand your anxiety," Dr. Marshall said, her voice remaining low and steady. "But the facts remain: your son requires only one healthy kidney from a living donor to thrive, and we cannot accept a donation that would endanger Sam's life. You have been given false information about the requirements." The crying started then, the familiar fake sobs, but underneath, I could hear a raw, real panic creeping in. Her entire strategy had collapsed under the weight of professional, ethical truth. She hung up abruptly. Dr. Marshall then called Michael. He was less volatile but equally entitled, insisting his mother had paperwork that proved he needed both. The doctor calmly repeated the legal and medical facts. Michael finally conceded, but not before blaming me for turning the doctors against him. Dr. Marshall looked at me across the desk, her expression softening. "I apologize for what your family has put you through, Sam. We are documenting all of this. Your actions were ethical and correct. You protected yourself. That was the key. Not that I was not a monster, but that my actions were correct." I left the hospital feeling a weight lifted off my chest, a physical lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. The fight was far from over, but now I had a strong, undeniable truth on my side. The next step had to be legal, an unbreachable wall to match the ethical one Dr. Marshall had provided. The moment the phone slammed down after Dr. Marshall's intervention, I knew the medical victory meant nothing to my mother. She wouldn't be swayed by facts or ethics. She would only understand legal force. The fear of being wrong had instantly morphed into white, hot, furious desperation. That night, the texts were pure venom. She called me a liar who had poisoned the doctors against her own flesh and blood. She accused me of wanting Michael dead so I could finally have my father's full attention. An accusation so absurd it was almost funny, given that Dad hadn't spoken to me in a decade. Ethan took my phone and started meticulously screenshotting every message, saving them in a computer folder labeled simply harassment documentation. My hands shook as I watched him work. Seeing the pattern of abuse laid out in a grid of dates and times made it feel less like chaotic family drama and more like a criminal offense. Ethan reminded me that her behavior proved exactly why I was right to say no. A real mother wouldn't demand one child sacrifice his life for another. The escalation didn't stop at texts. The next morning, Catalina, my supervisor, pulled me into her office before my rounds. She closed the door, a rare move that made my stomach clench. "Sam," she began, her voice low, "hospital security reported your mother tried to enter the dialysis unit last night around 9 o'clock. She told the guard she needed to educate the staff about family loyalty and medical ethics." I felt sick reading the security report on her computer screen. The guard, recognizing her from previous incidents, had stopped her in the lobby. She had argued for 20 minutes before finally leaving, screaming about murderous, helping me hide. Catalina assured me the hospital was taking staff safety seriously. They were putting a high-level alert on her name in the security system. If my mother tried to enter the building again, security would get an immediate alert and police would be called. She asked if I was okay, and whether I needed a temporary schedule change. Someone offering genuine kindness and support, without trying to fix or judge me, was almost enough to make me cry. Later that afternoon, during my lunch break, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. Sam, is that you? This is Lorenza. Lorenza, my mother's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 years. Not since before my family had cut me out. Her voice sounded genuinely concerned, not accusatory, which surprised me enough that I agreed to talk. I sat in my car in the far corner of the parking lot and told her everything, starting with the demand for both kidneys, through the workplace stalking, and ending with Dr. Marshall's intervention that exposed the lie about the illegal donation. Lorenza stayed quiet the whole time, just listening to the brutal, chaotic story. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. I'm not surprised she lied about what the doctors told her. Lorenza finally admitted. The words, coming from someone with my mother's bloodline, hit me differently than any external validation had. She's been enabling Michael's drinking since he was 16. We all saw it. No one could ever tell her anything when it came to Michael. Then, Lorenza confessed something that made my chest tight with a mix of anger and sorrow. She said the family had excluded me not because they hated me, but because Mom made maintaining contact with me too uncomfortable. If anyone suggested inviting me to an event, Mom would throw a fit, making the entire gathering miserable. Eventually, people just stopped asking. They chose peace over doing the right thing. I'm ashamed I went along with it for so long, Sam, Lorenza admitted. For the sake of peace, I let her freeze you out. We talked for nearly an hour. Lorenza explained how Mom controlled the guest lists and the conversations, isolating anyone who questioned her. She confirmed that many family members were deeply uncomfortable with the current harassment and the kidney demands, but they were afraid of the mother's retaliation. You are right to protect yourself, Lorenza promised. What she is asking is monstrous. Hearing those words from actual family, not just Ethan or co-workers, felt like an enormous weight shifting. It was the first family validation I'd had in a decade. That evening, I was making dinner with Ethan when my phone rang from the building's front desk. The doorman sounded nervous. Mr. Sam, your mother is in the lobby asking to come up. Do you want visitors? My stomach dropped. I told him firmly that I did not want visitors and asked him to have her leave. I could hear her voice, muffled but rising, demanding her rights as a mother. She started shouting loud enough that I could hear her clearly through the phone, yelling about how I was killing Michael and how the building staff was helping me commit murder. Ethan took the phone from my shaking hand and then immediately pulled up a number. We need a police report, Sam, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. We're not calling them on her to stop her right now. We're calling them to document the pattern of harassment. We need that paper trail for the next step. I had never called the police on my own mother before. It felt terrifying and huge, but when the wary, looking officer showed up an hour later, he listened to our story, the workplace stalking, the calls to the landlord, the texts, and tonight's scene, without judgment. This kind of behavior often escalates, the officer said, suggesting I consider getting a restraining order if it continued. His matter of fact treatment of the situation, not as personal drama, but as actionable harassment, was the final push I needed. This wasn't complicated family drama. This was a clear pattern of intimidation that needed a legal response. Ethan and I spent the rest of the evening researching restraining orders, pulling up the court forms, and making the final decision we were going to get legal protection. The spreadsheet of harassment was complete, yet the hardest conversation was still ahead, the one I'd avoided for a decade. Before that conversation, however, I had to ensure the legal groundwork was solid. Ethan had already found a family law and harassment lawyer named Alberto Campos. He specialized in cases exactly like mine, where family conflict escalated to the point of intimidation. I called Alberto that same night. His voice was professional but not cold, and he listened without interruption as I laid out the whole chaotic saga, the illegal demand for both kidneys, Dr. Marshall's intervention, the texts, the workplace stalking, and the police report from the apartment lobby incident. He told me to bring everything. Every screenshot, every incident report, every piece of evidence that showed a pattern of escalation. 2 days later, I sat across from Alberto in his downtown office. He was a man in his late 40s, wearing a suit without a tie, conveying authority mixed with accessibility. I handed him the thick folder Ethan and I had assembled. He spread the documents out on his desk, creating a grid of my mother's malice. You have a strong case for a restraining order, Sam, he stated, looking up from the mess of paper. The pattern is clear. You have multiple witnesses, and the workplace disruption is well documented. Harassment doesn't have to be physical. Stalking and repeated unwanted contact count. Hearing a lawyer validate my situation made something loosen in my chest. I wasn't being dramatic. This was real enough for the legal system to take seriously. Alberto outlined the entire process: filing the petition, the court hearing in about 2 weeks, and the need for me to testify about the continuous pattern of behavior. Given what you've shown me, I'm confident the judge will grant the order, he said. This will legally prohibit her from contacting you, coming to your work or home, or posting about you on social media. Any violation, and she faces immediate arrest. We scheduled our next meeting to prepare my testimony. Leaving his office, I felt proactive for the first time in weeks, no longer just reacting to my mother's attacks. I was building a shield. My newfound resolve was immediately tested the next day. I finished my shift and headed to the parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and stale exhaust. I saw her before she saw me. My mother was standing right next to my car, looking terrible. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and dark circles underscored her eyes, betraying days of sleepless desperation. I froze 20 feet away, keys tight in my hand, preparing to turn and run back to security. But she saw me and started talking fast, a desperate stream of words about Michael being her baby, and how she couldn't lose him. I know you're angry about the past, she pleaded, her voice breaking. But Michael doesn't deserve to suffer for family problems. You can end this, Sam. Just say yes. I stayed where I was, keeping the distance, and spoke calmly, factually. Michael isn't dying, Mom. He is on dialysis 3 times a week. He can live for decades like that. I see patients do it all the time in my unit. Her face twisted, her veneer of desperate victimhood cracking wide open. She started screaming that I was heartless, comparing her son to strangers. You are sentencing Michael to a miserable existence when you could save him with one simple choice, she shrieked, the sound echoing off the concrete. I pointed out the undeniable truth. I offered 1 kidney. 1 kidney would help Michael. You rejected that option because it wasn't enough for you. You want me on dialysis instead of Michael. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Then she actually nodded. Yes, she choked out, her voice raw. That is exactly what a real brother would do. Sacrifice himself completely for his brother, who is the victim here. His drinking wasn't his fault because you don't understand addiction, and you are being selfish by putting your own health above his life. It was the full, unvarnished confession. She was asking for my life, believing she was entitled to it. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Then she actually nodded. Yes, she choked out, her voice raw. That is exactly what a real sister would do. Sacrifice herself completely for her brother. Who is the victim here? His drinking wasn't his fault because you don't understand addiction, and you are being selfish by putting your own health above his life. It was the full, unvarnished confession. She was asking for my life, believing she was entitled to it. I realized she must have told Dad the exact same manipulative lie. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Then, she actually nodded. Yes, she choked out, her voice raw. That is exactly what a real brother would do. Sacrifice himself completely for his brother, who is the victim here. His drinking wasn't his fault because you don't understand addiction, and you are being selfish by putting your own health above his life. It was the full, unvarnished confession. She was asking for my life, believing she was entitled to it. I realized she must have told Dad the exact same manipulative lie. Just then, Bo, a security guard, rounded the corner. Just then, Bo, a security guard, rounded the corner. Just then, Bo, a security guard, rounded the corner. Someone must have reported the shouting. He recognized my mother immediately from the security alerts. He walked straight toward us, alert and focused. Mrs. Marshall, he said firmly, you need to leave hospital property right now. She tried to argue, but Bo cut her off. He stated clearly that she was trespassing, and if she didn't leave immediately, he would call the police. She looked at me one last time, an expression of profound, bitter betrayal, then turned and walked toward the exit. Bo waited with me until she was gone, then walked me to my car. You should think about changing up your schedule if you can, he advised through the open window. Come and go at different times, use different entrances, that kind of thing. His words confirmed the severity of the situation. Hospital security was worried enough about my safety to suggest I change my daily routine. My own mother was now officially a threat requiring tactical precautions. I drove home on autopilot. Ethan was already there, making dinner. He took one look at my face and stopped chopping vegetables. When I told him about the encounter and Bo's advice, Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled out his laptop and found Alberto Campos's number. "I'm calling him right now," he stated. "We need to get the court date moved up. This isn't just awkward family drama, Sam. This is stalking." I felt a rush of relief that I wasn't handling this alone anymore. Ethan was my pragmatic anchor, taking the terrifying, massive emotional problem and breaking it down into manageable, actionable steps. We were moving forward. After Dad's call, the silence felt heavy with the weight of decades of unspoken truth. I was preparing for a legal battle, but the emotional exhaustion was worse than the constant harassment. I needed help to process it, not just to fight it. Catalina had given me the name of a therapist who worked with healthcare workers dealing with intense family stress, Dr. Michaela Fields. I was skeptical of therapy, assuming I would be told to forgive my mother and prioritize reconciliation. But Dr. Fields promised something different, processing the past without pushing me toward toxic relationships. My first session was in a quiet, softly lit office on the third floor of the medical building. I sat in a comfortable chair and, once I started talking, the whole chaotic story poured out. The golden child narrative, the decade of abandonment, the trauma of the lonely miscarriage, the illegal demand for both kidneys, and the recent pattern of stalking and threats. Dr. Fields listened without interrupting, only taking occasional notes. When I finished, she didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply said, "It sounds like your mother has never seen you as a separate person with your own needs and rights. You've always existed in her mind as either an extension of her or a resource for your brother." That single statement was the most profound realization of the entire crisis. Nobody had ever put it so clearly. That's exactly what it felt like. I was not Sam, the nurse, the partner, the man with his own future. I was merely a tool to be used. And when I refused to cooperate, I became an obstacle to be removed. I kept returning to that phrase for the rest of the week, turning it over in my mind during my shifts. Dr. Fields helped me see how this pattern extended back to my childhood. When I wanted to quit piano lessons I hated, my mother made me continue for years because she liked telling people her son played. When I got pregnant at 18, she kicked me out not because she was disappointed in me, but because a teenage parent didn't fit the image she wanted to project. The miscarriage that followed wasn't a tragedy to her, it was a convenient problem solving itself. The demand for both kidneys was the ultimate expression of this delusion. My needs simply did not register. The fact that taking both kidneys would destroy my health was irrelevant because, in her mind, my existence was supposed to serve her purpose. Understanding the pattern didn't make the pain vanish, but it made me feel less crazy, less selfish. I wasn't being cruel. I was finally treating myself like a person with rights instead of an extension of her will. My second session with Dr. Fields centered on the miscarriage, a trauma I hadn't truly spoken about in 10 years. I realized how much shame I had been carrying, believing I was responsible for the pregnancy and the loss, and that my mother's cruelty was deserved punishment. Dr. Fields helped me reframe it. I was 18, alone and terrified, abandoned by the very people who should have helped me. The miscarriage wasn't a judgment on my character. It was a tragedy compounded by their deliberate failure. I had been carrying guilt for a decade that belonged squarely to the people who had failed me. The emotional shield I had worn for years was slowly dissolving, and in its place, I found a cautious sense of self-acceptance. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. The constant knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He said I was less jumpy, and I didn't flinch every time my phone buzzed. We were having dinner at his apartment when the conversation shifted into our future. He told me he was serious about us, about building a real life together. He'd been thinking about asking me to move, and even before the kidney crisis started. but he wanted to make sure I knew he wasn't offering, because I needed help, but because he wanted me. He had seen the worst of my family's dysfunction, the stalking, the texts, the cruelty, and he was still here. He was still choosing me. We talked for hours that night. We wanted the same things: marriage eventually, a home that felt safe, a life that was fundamentally honest and supportive. He held my hand across the table and promised me that I deserved good things, that I deserved people who stayed. For the first time in months, I cried the good kind of tears that came from relief, not pain. I finally felt like something in my life was moving forward in the right direction. Meanwhile, Alberto had filed the restraining order petition. We met again to prepare my testimony. He was meticulous, making sure I stayed calm, factual, and professional. Your mother's lawyer will try to paint this as family squabbling, vengeance over old grudges, Alberto warned. You must stick to the pattern of harassment and the documented threat to your life and career. We have the medical authority of Dr. Marshall and the police report. The facts are on our side, Sam. I went over the spreadsheet again: dates, times, locations, and the precise words my mother had used. Seeing the rows and columns of abuse laid out helped cement the legal argument. This wasn't complicated family drama, it was a crime. The day of the hearing was set for a cold Tuesday morning in late October. I knew the final, most terrifying confrontation was inevitable, but I wouldn't face it alone. I had Ethan, I had Alberto, and I finally had my own self-respect. I walked into the courthouse, clutching the folder of evidence, knowing this was the final act of self-preservation. The cold Tuesday morning air outside was nothing compared to the chill of the third-floor hallway. Alberto was waiting for me. He squeezed my shoulder, reminding me to stay calm and factual, no matter what happened. My mother was already there with her lawyer, sitting on a wooden bench. She looked utterly different from the desperate woman in the parking garage. Today, she wore a simple, expensive-looking dress and minimal makeup, radiating the image of a concerned, heartbroken mother. When she saw me, her face crumpled instantly into an expression of profound sadness, as if I were the one victimizing her. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on the heavy courthouse doors. I couldn't let her performance rattle me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with dark wood and an oppressive silence. Alberto and I took seats at one table. My mother and her lawyer sat at the other. When the clerk called the case, a judge entered, a woman in her 50s with an unreadable, non-nonsense expression. She quickly reviewed the documents, then asked me to testify first. My legs felt shaky as I walked to the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. Alberto guided me through the testimony with careful, precise questions. I described the initial kidney demand, the rejection of the ethical offer of one kidney, and her insistence on the illegal demand for both. Then I detailed the campaign of harassment that followed, the false calls to my workplace claiming I was having a mental breakdown, the calls to my landlord, the calls to Ethan, and the public scenes at the hospital, forcing security to intervene repeatedly. I spoke about the incident where she waited by my car in the parking garage, and the security guard's warning that I should change my routine to ensure my safety. Alberto presented the evidence systematically. The screenshots of the venomous text messages, the call logs showing the frequency of contact, the written statements from the hospital's security detailing the trespassing incidents, and the police report from the apartment lobby. I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral to concerned focus as the clear, aggressive pattern emerged. Finally, Alberto presented the statement from Dr. Grace Marshall, the transplant surgeon, explaining that double kidney donation was illegal, medically impossible, and that my mother had lied about the medical team's willingness to perform it. The judge's face hardened, losing all trace of neutrality. She started taking notes quickly. My mother's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, his voice smooth and sympathetic. He tried to suggest I was exaggerating normal family conflict, using the crisis vindictively over old grudges. He asked if it was true I had been estranged for 10 years, if I had refused family events, implying that I was the difficult, drama-causing daughter. I answered honestly, we were estranged because my mother kicked me out at 18 and never tried to reconcile. I did not refuse family events, I was simply never invited. And yes, the conflict is real, but it is focused on her attempt to demand an illegal sacrifice of my health. The lawyer tried to pin the blame back on me, but Alberto stood up for redirect and asked one simple question. Mr. Sam, did you offer to donate one kidney to your brother Michael, the legal and medically appropriate option? Yes, I confirmed. I offered one kidney. And what was your mother's response to that offer? She told me one wasn't enough. I stated clearly that I needed to give both and go on dialysis myself. The judge's expression made it clear that answer landed exactly as intended. She then addressed my mother directly, her voice sharp and authoritative. Mrs. Marshall, the judge began, did you demand both of your son's kidneys, knowing it was illegal and would require him to be on dialysis for the rest of his life? My mother's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off instantly and repeated the question. My mother's composure finally cracked. The doctors are wrong, she insisted, her voice wavering. I was only exploring all options to save my son. Any mother would do the same. The judge was unimpressed. Do you understand that harassing your son at his workplace could cost him his job? I was just trying to make him understand how serious the situation was, she sobbed. And do you understand that showing up at his home and workplace after being told to stay away constitutes persistent harassment? My mother's face flushed completely, and she started crying. But these were different tears. They were real tears of panic, as she finally realized her manipulation was utterly useless against genuine authority. The judge reached for her gavel. She stated clearly that the documented pattern of harassment was serious and persistent, and that I had a right to feel safe at work and at home. The judge granted the restraining order for 1 year. She prohibited my mother from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming to my workplace or home, or posting about me on social media. She explicitly warned that any violation would result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. It was over. I had legal protection. My mother couldn't contact me anymore without facing criminal consequences. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a deep, profound wave of relief mixed with an equally heavy sadness. Alberto was satisfied, telling me it was the exact outcome we hoped for. Ethan was waiting outside and hugged me tight, saying, "It's done, Sam. You did great." But standing there, on the courthouse steps, all I could think was that I had just secured a court order against my own mother. I protected myself legally, and I knew it was absolutely necessary, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt heavy and sad, like something permanent had broken that could never be fixed. The restraining order made the reality official: my mother would never change, and our relationship was permanently, legally, and finally terminated. The sound of the gavel was the end of one life, and the difficult beginning of another. 2 days after the courthouse hearing, Lorenza called. Her voice sounded strained but resolute as she told me Dad had finally confronted Mom about the lies. He had asked to see the medical records himself and discovered everything Mom had told him was false. The transplant team never said Michael needed both kidneys, and the doctors never said one wouldn't be enough. She had invented the entire narrative to manipulate him and the rest of the family into pressuring me. Dad was furious, Lorenza said. They had the biggest fight of their marriage. That same night, he packed a bag and showed up at Lorenza's house, asking to stay in her guest room while he figured things out. She'd never seen him so angry or so defeated. Realizing he had enabled 30 years of her worst behaviors, the narrative Mom had controlled for so long was finally cracking. Cousins were reaching out to each other, piecing together the truth. I listened to all this while buttoning my scrubs, feeling a strange, hollow sensation. Not relief, not quite sadness, just the odd feeling of watching an inevitable demolition. The family structure I had been trying to win approval from was dissolving, and I had been the catalyst. 3 weeks later, Alberto called to tell me Dad had reached out, asking if I'd be willing to meet with him alone. Just the two of us. I thought about it for a day before agreeing. We arranged it for the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had history. That Saturday morning, I arrived early and sat at a corner table. Dad walked in exactly on time, looking older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped, the weight of his actions visible. He sat down across from me, not attempting to touch me. He apologized for not protecting me when I was younger. He admitted he chose peace over standing up for what was right, and that he was ashamed of the decade of silence. He said he believed Mom's lies because he had simply trusted her to handle the details. I should have stood up for you back then, he finally managed. I should have reached out after you lost the baby. I know that now. The apology felt real heavy with regret, but forgiveness was too big for this moment. Words are easy, Dad, I said, my voice steady. You had a decade to reach out before Michael needed a kidney. He flinched, but didn't argue. He simply nodded and kept his eyes down. I'm willing to try rebuilding something slowly, I continued. Not just because you're guilty right now, but if you are serious about change. We can meet once a month, see if trust can grow back. He looked up then, something like relief crossing his face, and agreed immediately. We picked the third Saturday of every month. It felt structured, manageable, and safe. One phone call, one coffee meeting couldn't erase 10 years of failure, but maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something honest. That evening, Ethan and I signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment across town. The walls were plain white, but it felt like a blank canvas. We spent the first weekend painting the bedroom a soft blue, choosing colors that represented the life we wanted, not the one we inherited. We arranged the furniture intentionally, placing the couch under the window so we could look outside, every choice feeling deliberate and ours. I hung photos of me and Ethan on the walls, pictures from trips, dinners, and everyday life. No family photos went up. This was genuinely our space, a place where nobody could show up demanding things or making me feel guilty. A few weeks later, Lorenza called to invite me to a small family dinner at her house. Mom and Michael wouldn't be there, she promised. I agreed. When I arrived, the house smelled of roasted chicken. Dad was there, looking nervous, and several cousins I barely remembered came over immediately to hug me. It was awkward at first, but over dinner, the relatives started talking. One by one, they shared moments they had witnessed Mom treating me unfairly. Times they knew it was wrong, but chose silence over confronting her. Their honesty was a painful validation. I hadn't imagined the unfairness. Other people saw it and chose to look away. I thanked them for their honesty now, even if it came too late. Near the end of dinner, my cousin casually mentioned that Michael had finally gotten matched with a deceased donor and was scheduled for transplant surgery in 3 weeks. The news hit me strangely, a mix of relief and hollow finality. Relief because he would get the kidney he needed without me sacrificing my health. Relief because the crisis would finally end. I truly hoped the transplant went well. I wanted Michael to live and be healthy, just not at the cost of my own future. 3 months after the restraining order was granted, I realized one morning I had slept through the entire night without waking up anxious. Ethan and I had fallen into comfortable routines. My work performance remained strong, and Catalina told me the hospital was developing new protocols for staff harassment, partly because of what I had gone through. My experience would help protect other healthcare workers. Dad continued to show up for our monthly coffee meetings. He told me he'd started therapy to work on his codependency, learning how he'd enabled Mom's worst behaviors for decades. He apologized for his failures not as a dramatic event, but as a consistent truth he was trying to address. He asked about my life with genuine interest, remembering details and respecting my boundaries when I said I didn't want to discuss Mom or Michael. I sat in the apartment Ethan and I created, looking at the blue bedroom walls and the photos of our chosen life. I had built a support system with Ethan, Dr. Marshall Alberto, and family members who respected my boundaries. I had legal protection. I had created a life where I was valued and respected, where my needs mattered and my voice was heard. I finally chose myself after spending 28 years trying to earn approval from people who would never give it, and that choice felt right in a way nothing else ever had.